Alright, back with chapter 7. It says Solomon builds his palace. Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished his entire house. So Solomon built his house within 13 years he built it. It's a long time. He built the house of the forest of Lebanon. Its length was 100 cubits, and its breadth 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits, and it was built on 4 rows of cedar pillars, and with cedar beams on the pillars. It was covered with cedar above the chambers that were on the 45 pillars, 15 in each row. There were window frames in 3 rows, and window opposite window in 3 tiers. All the doorways and windows had square frames, and window was opposite window in 3 tiers. And he made the hall of pillars. Its length was 50 cubits, and its breadth 30 cubits. There was a porch in front with pillars, and a canopy in front of them. And he made the hall of the throne where he was to pronounce judgment, even the hall of judgment. It was finished with cedar from floor to rafters. His own house, where he was to dwell in the other court back of the hall, was of like workmanship. Solomon also made a house of the hall of for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had taken in marriage. All these were made of costly stones, cut according to measure, sewed with saws, back and front, even from the foundation to the coping, and from the outside of the great court. The foundation was of costly stones, huge stones of 8 and 10 cubits, and above are costly stones cut according to measurement in cedar. The great court had three courses of cut stone all around, and a course of cedar beams. So it had the inner court of the house of the Lord, and the vestibule of the house. The temple furnishings. And King Solomon sent and brought Hiram from Tyre, or from Lebanon. He was the son of a widow of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a worker in bronze, and he was full of wisdom, understanding and skill for making any work in bronze. He came to King Solomon and did all his work. He cast 2 pillars of bronze. 18 cubits was the height of one pillar, and a line of 12 cubits measured its circumference. It was hollow, and its thickness was 4 fingers. The second pillar was the same. He also made 2 capitals of cast bronze to set on the tops of the 2 pillars. The height of the one capital was 5 cubits, and the height of the other capital was 5 cubits. There were lattices of checker work with wreaths and chain. It says there were lattices of checker work with the wreaths of chain work for the capitals on the tops of the pillars. A lattice for the one capital, and a lattice for the other capital. Likewise, he made pomegranates in 2 rows around the one lattice work to cover the capital that was on the top of the pillar, and he did the same with the other capital. Now the capitals that were on the tops of the pillars in the vestibule were of lily work for 4 cubits. The capitals were on the 2 pillars and also above the rounded projection, which was beside the lattice work. There was 200 pomegranates in 2 rows all around, and so would the other capital. He set up the pillars at the vestibule of the temple. He set up the pillar on the south and called his name Jachin, and he set up the pillar on the north and called his name Boaz. On the tops of the pillars was lily work. Thus the work of the pillars was finished. Then he made the sea of cast metal. It was round, 10 cubits from the brim to brim, and 5 cubits high, and a line of 30 cubits measured its circumference. Under its brim were gourds for 10 cubits, and passing the sea all around. The gourds were in 2 rows, cast with it when it was cast. It stood on 12 oxen, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. The sea was set on them, and all their rear parts were inward. Its thickness was a hand's breadth, and its brim was made like the brim of a cup of the flower of a lily. It held 2,000 baths. He also made the 10 stands of bronze. Each stand was 4 cubits long, 4 cubits wide, and 3 cubits high. This was the construction of the stands. They had panels, and the panels were set in the frames. On the panels that were set in the frames were lions, oxen, and cherub. Cherubim were, of course, angels. On the frames, both above and below the lions and oxen, there were wreaths of beloved work. Moreover, each stand had 4 bronze wheels and axles of bronze, and at the 4 corners there were supports for a basin. The supports were cast with wreaths at the side of each. Its opening was within a crown that projected upward 1 cubit. Its opening was round as the pedestal is made, a cubit and a half deep. At its opening there were carvings, and its panels were square, not round. And the 4 wheels were underneath the panels. The axles of the wheels were of one piece with the stands, and the height of the wheel was a cubit and a half. The wheels were made like a chariot wheel. Their axles, their rims, their spokes, and their hubs were all cast. There were 4 supports at the 4 corners of each stand. The supports were were of one piece with the stands, and on the top of the stand was a round band half a cubit high, and on the top of the stand it stays, and its panels were of one piece with it. And on the surfaces of its stays and on its panels he carved cherubim, lions, and palm trees, according to the space of each, with the reeds all around. After this manner he made the 10 stands. All of them were cast alike, of the same measure and the same form. He made 10 basins of bronze. Each basin held 40 baths. Each basin measured 4 cubits, and there was a basin for each of the 10 stands. And he set the stands 5 on the south side of the house and 5 on the north side of the house. And he set the sea of the south at the southeast corner of the house. Hiram also made the pots, the shovels, and the basins. So Hiram finished all the work that he did for King Solomon on the house of the Lord. The 2 pillars, the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the tops of the pillars, and the 2 lattice works to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals that are on the tops of the pillars, and the 400 pomegranates for the 2 lattice works, 2 rows of pomegranates for each lattice work, to cover the 2 bowls of the 2 capitals that are on the pillars, the 10 stands and the 10 basins on the stands, and the 1 sea, and the 12 oxen underneath the sea. Now the pots, the shovels, and the basins, all these vessels in the house of the Lord, which Hiram made for King Solomon, were of burnished bronze. In the plain of the Jordan the king cast them in the clay ground between Sukkah and Zarim. And Solomon left all the vessels unweighed, because there were so many of them. The weight of the bronze was not certain. So Solomon made all the vessels that were in the house of the Lord: the golden altar, the golden table for the bread of presence, the lampstands of pure gold, 5 on the south side, 5 on the north, before the inner sanctuary, the flowers, the lamps, the tongs of gold, the cups, snuffers, basins, dishes for incense, and fire pans of pure gold, and the sockets of the gold for the doors of the innermost parts of the house, the most holy place, and for the doors of the nave of the temple. With all the work that King Solomon did on the house of the Lord was finished, and Solomon brought in the things that David his father had dedicated, the silver, the gold, and the vessels, and stored them in the treasuries of the house of the Lord. So 7 is a long chapter, as you know, and basically talks about Solomon built his palace, where he's going to live, and he's also building the temple furniture, which is going to be put in the temple of God. So, and they have a map here. It has Solomon's temple and palace complex. To get to the new quarter that Solomon built from the old city of David, or old Jerusalem, one had to pass through the gate in the northern Davidic city wall, or northern Jerusalem today. Going in a northerly direction, the new complex consisted of an entrance hall, the so-called Hall of Pillars, the house of the forest of Lebanon, the porch, the king's house, and the house of his wife Pharaoh's daughter. The house of the forest of Lebanon, shown here to the west of the Hall of Pillars, served as an armory. The main hall had rows of cedar pillars and gold shields and targets hung on its walls. To the east of the Hall of Pillars was the porch, or the Hall of Thrones, Solomon's place of judgment. Beyond the Hall of Pillars lay Solomon's palace. Here is the setting which has so impressed the Queen of Sheba on her visit to King Solomon. Of course, later on, Queen Sheba, who was from Yemen today, she traveled from Yemen all the way to Jerusalem, to Israel, to visit Solomon and to see how smart he was. Very interesting there, and of course we'll see that later on. So there are parallels between the palace complex and the contemporary places, or the contemporary. Hold on, my page keeps on. Get my fan running, so my page keeps on flipping over. It says these are parallels between the palace complex and the contemporary palaces of northern Syria. So, so the palace, or basically, the palace that Solomon's living in looks just like the palaces that are in northern Syria. So maybe you get an idea from northern Syria. Here notice. It says, with the order of the parts of the building in 1 Kings 7 corresponding to the order of the units in these palaces. Now, here's the Solomon's temple and palace complex. This is what it looked like. You had the temple, the altar, the sea, Solomon's house, the court, Hall of Pillars, the house of Pharaoh's daughter, the house of the forest of Lebanon, Hall of Pillars, and the Hall of the Throne. And this is what it looked like. So basically, you have the temple, Solomon's temple, where God was at, where the Ark of the Covenant was at, of course. And then, I'm trying to say this right. You had stairs walking up to Solomon's temple. And then when you turned west, yeah, when you went up to the temple and you turned west, you would go into Solomon's house. So Solomon's house is right next to Solomon's temple. Then when you went past Solomon's house, then you had right next to Solomon's house, you had to get the house of the Forest of Lebanon and the Hall of Pillars and the Hall of Throne. So basically, you had Solomon's temple. Right next to that was Solomon's house, and then right next to that was the house of the Forest of Lebanon, Hall of Pillars, and the Hall of Throne. So they are all right there together. Now this is what it looked like right here. See, the top, that would be Solomon's temple. In the middle would be Solomon's house. And on the bottom would be the Hall of Pillars, the Hall of Throne, and the house of the Forest of Lebanon were all on the bottom. So that's what it looked like. Like I said, Solomon's temple was up on top, and in the middle he had where Solomon's house was at. On the bottom was the rest of the house of the Forest of Lebanon, the Hall of Pillars, and the Hall of Throne, which is all right there. So that's that about Solomon's temple and palace complex. And there's another picture here. Bronze basins and stands. In the temple courtyard, there were 10 bronze-wheeled stands that held 10 basins filled with water, 5 on the south side of the temple, 5 on the north side. They were used to rinse off the animal parts that were used for the burnt offerings. Each stand was 6 feet long, 6 feet wide, and about 5 feet high. Each basin was 5 feet in diameter and held about 240 gallons of water. So these small basins, they weren't really that small. I mean, they were pretty big to hold 240 gallons of water, so that they could wash off animals, so that they could burn them to God, pretty much. That's what the basins look like, just like that. So pretty interesting there. That's chapter 7. I'll be right back with chapter 8 here in a minute.